Chapter, is whenever the Rambam in the laws of Shabbos says chayiv, which means you're obligated, in other words, you've sinned, it means, Shirley, you have to be quiet. It means that if you did it by accident, you have to bring a sacrifice. If you did it on purpose with witnesses, it's stoning. And if you did it on purpose without witnesses, God will punish you with kares, which is cutting off. Whenever the Rambam says you are exempt from punishment, so you do something on Shabbos and you are exempt, it means it is forbidden to do it, but you don't get a punishment. You got that? It's an important point. So, obligated means you get a punishment or a sacrifice. Exempt means you don't get a punishment, but it is forbidden. And then the third category is when it says mutar, which means permitted. So that's just important because we're going to be going through the 39 melachos with their offshoots and explaining the offshoots of them. And sometimes we will say chayiv, which means you have done the sin, you need to bring a sacrifice or death penalty. Sometimes we will say pater, you are exempt from punishment, but it is still forbidden to do. And sometimes it will say permitted. So that's one I wanted to clear. So there's obligated, obligates punishment. There is exempt from punishment, but forbidden, and there is permitted. Now, just to review, we said that there are 39 types of work in the tabernacle. And those are called the avos, the father types of works. And then they have offshoots. And we said an offshoot is just as bad as the father. There's no difference, punishment or stringency-wise. The only difference is if you do a father and an offshoot, you only get punished once. You only have to bring one sacrifice, right? You only have to bring one sacrifice if you do a father and offshoot of and a tulda. Now, it has to be a father and its offshoot. If you do one father and one offshoot of another father, that's two. Okay, so we're going to go through now, and we're going to go through a lot of the offshoots. And the purpose of going through the offshoots is to clarify the design of the father ones and show what exactly, if it says you cannot plow, well, I'm digging, I'm not plowing, right? So we're going to clarify exactly what they are. Okay, so now it says hakorish kolshu chayev. If you purposely plow even a tiny bit, because all you need for a seed is one little hole, then you sin obligate. You are okay. If you go and you are 1 second. Okay, let's say you go and you're weeding out different things. Now you're weeding out those things. So you're digging out around different things, even though you're not directly planting something. That is considered plowing. And if you do a little bit, you are chayiv, you're obligated. Now let's say you go and you have a field that's rocky and you're just making it flat, right? You're making it flat, you're making a walkway flat, in front of your house there's a mound of dirt and you want to flatten it, or you're filling up holes. That is making the field nice, that is obligated because of plowing. And even if you do a tiny bit. And similarly, if you have holes in the ground and you're making those, even if someone will trip in it, you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos, that is chorish. Okay, that is the first. So basically we've defined is it doesn't matter if you're making a field nice. It doesn't matter how you're making the field nice. That is included in plowing. Because plowing is making the field nice to plant. So any other type of beneficial things for the field is plowing. If you plant even a tiny bit, you are chayiv. And we'll see later on there are things which have a measurement and things that don't have a measurement. This does not have a measure. You plant a little bit. Now, let's say you are pruning a tree to make the tree grow better. That is also considered planting. However, let's say you are watering plants on Shabbos. This is also planting, right? You're not allowed to water plants on Shabbos. And similarly, if you're soaking, they always have now on social media, they show how you can soak a seed of something and sprout it. So that is also considered planting, and you're obligated. So that is the second one. Okay, now the third one. Now, if you harvest. Now, harvesting is different than the previous two. It has a measurement. It's only worth harvesting if you're harvesting something substantial, right? The other ones, if you plant a seed, you can plant a tree. If you plow a field, even one drop, you can plant something in it. But harvesting, if you harvest the amount of a fig, you are chayiv. You have sinned. You've done the malacha. you've done the work. If you pull out with your hands, also that's considered the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're doing it with a tool or a plant, a tool or your hand. Similarly, if you uproot something from where it grows, you're weeding out. Okay, we'll talk about weeding soon. But if you're uprooting something from the ground or from its growth, then you are obligated because of harvesting. And therefore, let's say you have a rock which has moss or you have different growths on top of other things, right? So or let's say you have, back in the olden days, if you keep cheese or wine in a cellar, it might grow some moss on it or some you're not allowed to pick it off on Shabbos, because that is considered harvesting, because this is the place that it's growing. But if you have a flower pot, and the flower pot does not have any holes in the bottom, so it's not growing in the ground, if you uproot, if you cut it, you are pater, which means you're not allowed to do it, but you won't have to give a sacrifice, because this is not really the true place of growth in a flower pot. And therefore, it's interestingly enough, if you have a bonsai tree, talking about bonsais in my family a lot lately, if you have a bonsai tree, if you're pruning it, right, so it is different if it has holes in the bottom or not.
It's really...
But pater again means exempt. Exempt means it's forbidden. It's 100% forbidden. Just you don't have the full sense of punishment. Okay, 1 second. And if you have enough holes for a small root to grow out, that's considered if it's on the ground. And if you pick it, then you are chayiv. You could have to bring a sacrifice with death penalty. Questions after. Yeah, questions after. Okay. Anything. Stop that, Mendel. Please stop kicking the table. Okay. Anything which is growing, and by picking it, it helps it grow. For example, aspasta and silka. Aspasta is like some kind of small grass. What does it say?
Alfalfa.
Alfalfa.
Or mango.
Or this is beet plants. So, I mean, people from the beet plants, I don't know exactly how it works. Sometimes when you pick out certain things, it helps the plant spread more or helps. So those things, if you do it by accident, you pull out beets to help your beet crop grow. You've done 2 sacrifices worth of sin, 2 death penalties worth of sin. One of them is because you harvested, and the other one is because you're helping it grow. Similarly, if you prune, and let's say you're pruning something, and then you're going to take these twigs and use them for firewood, right? So you are doing 2 things. You are harvesting wood, as well as you are planting. You are making the tree grow better. If you have, now this is another very interesting thing. You have like a mound of dirt, which has grass on it, and you lift up that mound, you have harvested the grass, even though it's still growing in the dirt. So it's actually very interesting. Let's say it's on a table, and then you put it on the ground, then you've just planted, because the mound of dirt, once it touches the ground, is considered planting. So it's an interesting thing. If you have a flower pot and it has holes in the bottom, and you take it from the table and you put it on the ground, on the earth, that's a sin. That's work on Shabbos. Okay. Now, if you have dates which dried in the plant, or a tree which have dried fruit, and you pick them on Shabbos, you're chayiv. Even though, with regard to other laws, they're considered, if a dried fruit is no longer raisins in a vineyard, are no longer collecting nutrition, that's why they're drying out. But for Shabbos, it's considered, with regard to Shabbos, considered as if you've harvested. If you pull off ulshin, I think chicory or something like that, or these different things, these are things which are famous for animal food. So now we said, what is the measurement for is a fig size? That's a good size for a human to harvest to eat. However, let's say you're doing it for an animal. What amount obligates you for harvesting for an animal? The amount of a small kid, a lamb, the amount that could fit in his mouth. And if you're going to pick these things in order to cook something, what amount is considered? You're going to burn it and you're going to be able to cook something. The amount which is considered is the amount to cook an egg, 1 egg. If you gather foods, okay.
To produce for human consumption.
So if you're going to gather foods from the field, the amount is like a fig for a human. For an animal, the mouthful of a kid, goat, right? If you're going to burn it to cook an egg, and the egg we're talking about is an average egg. And anytime it says enough to cook an egg, it's enough to cook a fig worth of the egg. And a fig is 1 from 3 of a third of an egg.
Fill the mouth of a kid.
Yeah, the mouth. So that's if you're picking for an animal. And I was gathering for an animal. And gathering is only with things growing from the ground. Okay, you're gathering dried figs in order to make a circle. So dried figs in those days, they came in like cakes. And I think maybe today, probably, if you go to some places, you can get like especially like in LA and like the Persian communities, you get like a circle of figs. Or let's say you poke holes in figs in order to stick a string through to tie them together to make them one. That is considered the same thing as gathering and anything included. Okay, now dash. Dash is threshing. So this is actually very, very interesting. Threshing is the amount of a fig, and it only is things which grow from the ground. Now, what threshing? The tolda of threshing, the offshoot of threshing, is mafarik. Mafarik is to release one thing from another thing. For example, if you milk an animal on Shabbos, that's considered threshing. That's considered you're extracting. So extracting is not allowed. And then similarly, if you hurt an animal which has skin and blood comes out, then, now why would you do that? Possibly because it's healthy for the animal. Then it's mafarik, and that's if you need the blood to come out. But if you're just trying to hurt the animal, let's say you got angry and you hurt the animal, you wouldn't be chayiv because you have no benefit. When you do a malacha, way back it says you have to have some kind of benefit, work from the work. If you're just doing it out of anger or damaging, then you don't have to bring a sacrifice. And there has to be enough blood that it's a significant amount that you would have a purpose in the blood coming out. When are we saying this? When you hurt an animal. But if you hurt your friend, even though you're trying to hurt him, and you're trying to damage, then you're chayiv. Because when you hurt an animal, when you hurt a human, you usually have an intention, and you're doing it in order to calm yourself down. And even if you don't want any blood or anything like that, and you're trying to hurt him, then you are chayiv. If you do it on purpose, you'll be put to death, etc., etc. All right. There are 8 types of rodents listed in the Torah, which if you touch a dead one after they're dead, then you become impure. And those are special 8 types of shrutzim, 8 types of rodents, weasels, a turtle, frogs are included in them actually, even though those ones are considered to have skin with regard to Shabbos. And therefore, if you will hurt them and blood will come out, then you will be chayiv, you will be obligated. So it's actually interesting, like if let's say one's bothering you or something, a little rodent, a mouse, so then you could be obligated. However, and those are like any big animal. However, other rodents and small creatures, those ones are not included. And you will be exempt from punishment. You're not allowed to kill them or hurt them, but you'll be exempt from punishment. So any of those things that blood comes out, you will be chayiv, you'll be obligated. Okay, squeezing juice out of food. That is extracting. So that comes from threshing. So squeezing fruit out of juice, that is mafarik, that is extracting. And you're not chayiv until it's enough juice. You're not obligated for punishment until it's enough juice, like a fig. And from the Torah, you're only obligated, Mendel, please stop. From the Torah, you're only obligated if it's olives and grapes. And you're allowed to squeeze a grapefruit or grapes into your food, because if the juice goes into food, then that's okay. You're going from food to food, so you're not fully extracting it into a separate thing. However, if you do it to a vessel which doesn't have food, this is considered. This is a great example. People like to put lemon in their salad or on their fish. So if you extract the lemon into a cup, you're not allowed to do that. But if you extract it onto the food, then you're allowed to. And if you do it into a cup, it's a big deal. Okay. If you are, okay, now let's say you're milking. Please ask after. If you're milking into food, or you go onto a cow, and they actually say this is really healthy. I've seen like different people talking about, if you drink straight out of the cow's udder, even though it's not forbidden, you're not obligated, you're exempt, right? Which means you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. You're exempt, means you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. However, if you do it into a vessel, then you are chayiv. So if it's straight into food, you have cereal, and you put it into the cow's udder, then you are exempt.
Exempt means
Means you're not allowed to do it, but you don't get death penalty or sacrifice.
it means not permitted, but you're not punished.
Not permitted, but you're not punished, yeah.
And liable, I'm just going by the
Liable means you're punished,
It's
or sacrificed or punished, and exempt means you're not permitted to, but there's no repercussions. So you're absolutely not allowed to do things which you're exempt on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do things which you're exempt on Shabbos, but you don't get punished.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, I was using the word obligated instead of liable, but it means it obligates punishment. Okay. If you're winnowing or you're separating, this is a very, very tough one. If you look in the 39 melachos book over there, which has the point out, hey, is that borer? And you say, whoa, I never thought about that. Okay, but anyways, let's go. If you're Zorah, which is winnowing is when they throw up the wheat and the extra chaff would blow out in the wind. Borer is they take out the chaff that didn't come out of the winnowing, the heavier, bad pieces of wheat. So if you do them as much of a fig, you are chayiv, you are liable. If you are making cheese, this is considered borer, you're separating, you're boiling, right? So besides all the cooking and everything like that, you're causing the whey and the curds to separate. Similarly, you have, wine develops like the rocks at the bottom. So
Dregs.
what are they called? Dregs. So taking those out is borer. If you put it through a sifter, also it's a problem. So there are different ways you're able to separate, because when we eat, we by definition a lot of times need to separate things. But how to do it, and why are we counting these three together? Because every job in the Mishkan has its own category, even though a lot of these are quite similar. If you're winnowing, you're taking it away. If you're picking out, you're taking it away. And if you're sifting, then you're also taking away the bad. You're separating the bad from the good. So those are all three things.
Is peeling an orange
We'll
separated?
talk about it soon.
Okay.
If you are taking away food from the bad parts, so you have the good and the bad. Peeling an orange is okay because they aren't mixed. Right? They're connected, but they're not mixed. If they're mixed, then that's a problem. So, if you take the food from the bad part, I'll give you an example. You have a watermelon. You can't take the seeds out of the watermelon, but you can eat the watermelon around the seed. You can eat, or you can break off a piece of watermelon with no seed on it. Or, well, we'll talk about that soon. Or there are two types of foods, and you separate them, right? So, if you take the food from the negative part, or you have two types of food and they're mixed, and you separate them in a sifter, then you are chayav, you are liable. And in another type of sifter, it's okay. Now, when are you allowed to separate? If you're taking the food with your hand to eat now, that's okay. So this is what they say. So if you use a vessel, then it's not allowed. If you're taking the good from the bad, if you're taking the good from the bad to prepare a dish to put on the table, that's not allowed. And if you are taking the bad from the good, that's never allowed. So here's the rule, and this is what they say. It's biyad, miyad, with your hand, to eat right away. Miyad means right away. Ochel mitov psolos, food from the bad, not the good from the bad, not the bad from the good. If you have those three conditions, then you can separate.
So a lot of the stuff can be done in the privacy of your own home. What are you supposed to do if you catch yourself doing this, right? And
So Shabbos is a hard one, because when someone's converting to Judaism, the hardest thing is Shabbos, because a lot of these laws here, it's not enough to have the knowledge. you have to really, really review it again and again and again until it becomes your second nature. Because I'm just eating. Wait, why? No, there's nothing wrong.
Right,
You
but
know.
what do you do when you finally say, oh, I did something wrong? I
Well,
mean,
so usually what you need to do, if you realize you can stop, but really it means that you need to take more time during the week to learn, to learn it.
Are you on 13?
I just got to 13. I didn't read it yet. Okay, one second. Shamenda, I want you to remember. Biyad, miyad, echel, mitefselis. Those are the three things. Hand for now, and food from the good from the bad.
Okay, so if I want some fish from tilapia.
Okay, after.
I
Yes. You could take
a
the
bunch
flesh out of the.
I could take a bunch of pieces of flesh that I like, and are you allowed to squeeze a lemon on top?
Yes. Okay, so now this is actually interesting. This is the origin of gefilte fish. Because fish it's custom to eat fish on Shabbos, and you want to make a whole fish. Lily got into the whole fish. Costco started carrying kosher whole fish. So I cooked last week for Shabbos a whole fish. And before Shabbos, I removed all the bones because on Shabbos, it's very technical. When you're eating, it's hard. Now, if you have the bones in it, you can take the flesh and spit out the bones. You can do different things like that. Also, you can squeeze lemon if you want to squeeze lemon on it, but you can't squeeze lemon into a cup. So these are difficult laws. Okay, let's go on further. If you take the bad from the good, even with your hands, then you're liable. So good from the bad is more lenient than the bad from the good.
Oh, that's the distinction.
Okay.
Good.
Good to
Yeah.
know.
Okay. If you are taking out things from like their shells, so
It says beans from
now,
the,
so these are like
lupini.
lima beans or what beans does it say?
It says lupini.
Okay, lupini beans. So basically, these things, when you cook them in their shell, it causes to taste better. So it comes out, the negative part is mixed with it because the food needs it. You know, it tastes better. It's part of the food. Okay. Let's say I'm gonna eat it in an hour. I have a fish. People are here. Give me 15 minutes. 15 minutes to take it out.
So these are things that are mixed together.
So generally, they're things which are mixed together. Lupini beans are interesting exception to a lot of a shell of a thing. Now, I'll give you an example. Like a lot of people don't eat pistachios on Shabbos. Now, the reason why they don't eat pistachios is because what you may end up doing, or peanuts, a lot of times a piece of shell ends up with the mixed in, right? Let's say mix in whatever it is. You weren't paying attention and you decided to do 5 of them and a shell drop. So now it caused you to do burra. So a lot of people stay away from those foods. There are certain foods.
But you can remove the shell.
You can take one pistachio and take the shells off and eat it like orange because it's not mixed in. Okay. If you take the good from the bad in order to put it aside for later, even for the same day, it's as if you put it to store and therefore you are liable. If there are 2 types of food which are mixed, you can separate them to eat right away with your hands. But however, if it's for later on in the day, like if you're sitting at your meal and you have 2 types of food, so you have peas and carrots, and they're chopped up, frozen ones mixed together, you can separate them right now to eat them. But you cannot do it for later on in the day. It's liable for later on in the day. Okay, you're sifting through wine or oil or water.
Filtering.
Filtering, yeah, and you're putting it through a filter. And any other thing in their type of filter, then you are chayev. So this is a very good example. I'll tell you soon. Then you are liable, and that's as so much as you did as much as a fig. However, so it is forbidden to do it. That even less than a fig, right? All these things, by the way, if it's forbidden at a fig, it's forbidden to do less, but you're just not liable for punishment until you've done a fig. However, you could put wine that does not have these things, or clear water in through handkerchiefs and stuff like baskets, in order so it should be very clear. So if you're not separating a significant thing inside there, it's okay. Even though you're going to put it through a shirt, you're going to get but you can't even see what's there. You don't even know if it's separating, right? If it's clear water. So you could put water into a burrito filter, right? Even though they're microorganisms, and in New York, they're bugs actually in the water. In New York, there's bugs in the water. Everyone knows it.
So you can have a filter system in your house?
It can't be electric. Well, actually, not necessarily. I have to think about it because it can't be electric. It could be non-electric.
Well, there's passive filtration systems, and then there's the, what do they call it, the, not infrared, but ultraviolet. The ultraviolet purifiers have.
Okay, and all these kashrus agencies, they have a department for Shabbos to work out these things, because a lot of times the technology will have a lot more details in it than a regular rabbi is aware. So you have rabbis who are literally like, they're not necessarily, but they're like literally as good as trained chemists, trained engineers and everything to be able to take apart and work out these things.
So I got a quick question. I used to live on the Big Island, and we used to catch rainwater used to have a 10,000 gallon tank. So we had filtration systems, both passive and electrified, in order to remove all the impurities and all the stuff that could make you sick. So my question is before Shabbos, could I have saved some of that water that was
Yes,
purified for drinking during
Yeah,
Shabbos?
so like the problem would be if like, let's say you went through a drought and you had no water, and then Shabbos, it rained a lot, and now you have water on Shabbos. That would be the problem with it. Yeah, we'll
But I
talk.
could do it before Shabbos.
Yes,
so
yes.
that's fine.
Okay. So long as the job is done. Okay, let's go on further. So you could put water on top of. Okay, so I just want to mention, like let's say coffee on Shabbos. So coffee is a couple problems, but one of the problem is so one of the things that we do is we take coffee filters. I have what's called a pour over. You put coffee in the pour over, and then you pour water in that. Now that you're not considered separating, because the thing was never mixed. You poured the water. Here's coffee sitting there, and you poured water through it, and it went through, and the filter doesn't hold the coffee. However, if you would, let's say, mix coffee and water, and cook coffee, and then pour it into a filter, and now the filter would separate it, that wouldn't be allowed. So there's a lot of interesting things like that,
But it's not cooking?
So
when you're
what we have is the water's hot, and we'll talk about cooking later. If you take hot water and you pour it into another vessel, then it's not considered cooking for certain things anymore. That's called So
you can do.
let's say you want to make tea on Shabbos. So we have a hot water urn that people get for Shabbos. So you have this hot water urn. Now, if you put that water directly on tea, that's not allowed. That's considered cooking. Or if you fill up a cup directly and put the tea in, that's not allowed. But if you fill up that cup and then pour that cup into another cup, you can stick a tea bag in it. And it's the same thing with coffee. Now, instant coffee, some people, instant coffee is a very interesting subject. So it used to be there was one type of instant coffee. What you do is instant coffee, and we'll talk about cooking later in the next law. So I'm going to just finish this and go. So instant coffee used to be what they did is they cook coffee and then they dehydrate it. And you take that powder. So you're not really cooking, it's already cooked. Now, there's three types. And that's Taster's Choice. They make what's called freeze-dried.
Freeze-dried.
So that's a different process. So you're not really cooking it. You are cooking it somewhat.
It just tastes good.
And then Starbucks has instant coffee, which is micro ground. They say it's so small ground that it dissolves, So that, I read different articles, different rabbis said, oh, this might be better not to use this on Shabbos because it's raw, it's roasted coffee, but it's never been used as coffee. And it's literally just really extremely micro ground. Then you have in Israel, then you have what's called French press is also another subject. If you're allowed to use that on Shabbos.
Yeah.
And there's a way you're allowed to and a way you're not allowed to. So I read an article
You're
once.
separating.
Well, so what you're doing is you're separating. But the thing is you're not actually separating. It's still in the same cup. So I read an article and it said, what would be the problem? The problem is if you would push the filter down and it's totally separated, that there's no water in the bottom, right? No water in the bottom, so you've separated it.
Right.
So what it recommended there is to put a piece of, like a ball of foil underneath,
To keep
and you push it down so there's a little bit water in the bottom. You're not totally separating it, or don't just, basically it said you have to make sure you don't push it down all the way, because if you push it down all the way, you separated it. So it said, but if you forget, it's easy to forget. So it said, what we recommend is put like something underneath that's not coffee, or some full coffee beans underneath. So that way there'll always be some water in the bottom. Because the French presses, if you use them right and you take out the water, you can see the bottom can be dry almost, could really be squeezed out.
Another solution is just to brew your coffee cold.
So now,
And then you can keep it in your.
so cold brew coffee is a popular solution nowadays. In the olden days, when people had, they didn't have hot water urns like today where you just plug them in before Shabbos. And still till today, what a lot of people do is they'll make coffee essence or they make tea essence and mix that with water on Shabbos.
Can you use a programmable coffee maker?
So programmable has other issues we'll get to, potentially. The way I understand programmable coffee is that if you program it before Shabbos and you set it up that you won't do it, it would be putter, exempt liability, but there might be some issues of setting it up. That's the side issues. So ideally you should make your coffee on Shabbos with the permitted ways. But like a lot of people, what they'll do is actually, me on Pesach, I don't need anything processed, so I roast my own coffee beans. And then it comes on Shabbos, it's very hard to cook them because they're not instant. And I don't always have hot water on Shabbos, on Pesach, because I just didn't buy a hot water machine. And then I did buy one year. They're expensive. And then I lost the wire. The wire broke, and the wire is like a unique wire, which only you have to, they don't sell it anywhere. So what people will also do is they'll buy a thermos. Please stop. They'll buy a thermos, and they will fill it up before Shabbos. And now there's 24-hour thermoses and all sorts of nifty things like that. Okay.
That's what your father-in-law.
So that's what my in-laws do. My in-laws drink a lot of hot drinks, and that's what they. Okay. So let's go on further. If you are going to put in.
I'll tell you the story later.
If you have wine, which you are filtering, okay, I'm sorry. You could put water through, a dreg or whatever it is in order to clear it, and you could put a scrambled egg to filter the mustard, some kind of to filter the
Mustard seed strainer.
Mustard seed strainer. Okay. Then you have mustard seed, which was kneaded in Erev Shabbos. You can mix it. Okay. Similarly, wine.
Taken straight from the press.
So this is wine in its. So back then, wine was barrel or wine in. They had some different mechanisms of keeping. They would keep the wine raw, and then you have to mix it with water. That's what they would do in the olden days. So. Or you have to lighten it. It was very, very strong. So wine, as long as it is in the barrel, you can pour it through handkerchiefs, because there's still not a separation between the dregs. They're mixed in, and they're like one thing. And similarly, mustard and I guess mustard seeds. Now the next malacha is grinding. Grinding, you are obligated if you grind as much as a gregaris, as a fig. And if you grind up spices, that is in the tool, that's considered grinding. If you cut something which is a vegetable, a vegetable which is detached, obviously. So then you cut it very small. That's grinding. Similarly, if you wood chip up, or we spoke about earlier, or you scrape up. So there's actually a lot of things. If you scrape certain things on Shabbos, it's considered grinding. Okay, if it makes like a powder. However, if you cut wood, you're not chayiv until it's small enough to cook a. You're not liable until it's small enough to cook a fig of an egg. Merakid. Merakid means sifting. So it's called merakid because merakid means dancing. And when you sift, you're kind of dancing. Anyways. You are, if you do the amount of fig, you are liable. If you knead on Shabbos, kneading is also quite extended. If you knead on Shabbos, similarly, if you make mud, this is considered kneading. And what is the measurement? In order to the mouth of a core of gold workers.
It says here, a lip for a goldsmith's furnace.
Yeah. So, okay. You cannot knead ashes and not heavy sand and not, was that porridge? Okay. If you take certain seeds and you mix them with like seeds of sesame or flax, and you mix them with water, this is considered kneading, because they become it becomes a very interesting substance. So I'll just stop here, but there's a couple interesting things which could be kneading. Like one is if you're making tuna on Shabbos, cans of tuna could be kneading. So you have to make sure you put enough mayo, a lot of mayo, so it's not like a fully kneaded substance, or not mix it so much. Oatmeal. People make instant oatmeal. So making instant oatmeal, if you're using hot water, etc., and you do it right, you have to make sure there's enough. Some people like no water in it, and some people like a lot of water. Well, a lot of water is easier to do on Shabbos because otherwise you're making like a kneaded substance. All right, any questions? I just want to say, this is really the tip of the iceberg. This is the tip of the iceberg. The extension, there's so many things on Shabbos. Nowadays we live in an age, there's so much discussed online with like the OU and all these different things and articles about how to make coffee properly and how to cook this and how to chop that, and is this tool allowed and that tool allowed, but this is the tip of the iceberg. All right, Tanya Chapter 33. All right, it's been a few weeks, so I'm going to review what we went through. We went through some very deep stuff, actually. Chapter 33 is very interesting because until chapter 33, chapter 32 is in brackets about loving your fellow Jew, and we said if you totally crush your external ego and your animal soul, so to speak, and you let your soul come out, then you'll begin to love every Jew because you realize you're a soul. You're not really, you're not really a body. But really, the context of chapter 32 was talking about the chapter before. The chapter before was talking about what do you do if you're just not interested in Judaism. You want to be interested, you're just not getting lit, you're not getting attracted to it. So we explained there, we said you have to put yourself lower than everybody else and realize that there's no scoreboard. Everyone's really souls. And we said you have to realize that your life aspirations are likely totally off. If your life aspirations aren't godly, spiritual aspirations are totally off. And if you crush those aspirations, then you will be joyous and you'll start viewing all your aspirations in life as holy things and things with purpose.
The link that I originally got from you only goes up to chapter 32. It stops.
So chapter 33, it starts off, and I'm going to go through it outside.
So I get up to 32.
Oh, okay.
And then when I click for the next one, it's no longer.
You're in a different section of the Tanya.
Oh.
So basically, there are 5 sections of the Tanya. So I'm going to click on the right section, and this is chapter 33.
Sorry, I just
No worries.
don't know what happened
All right. Chapter 33. Okay.
there. Thank you.
Okay. So another thing. Okay. So this is what we said. We spoke in the beginning of the chapter, and we said, here is another thing that you can do in order to become happy. There's sometimes you need to be happy, and we spoke in the beginning of chapter 26 that in order to serve God, you have to be happy. And so the whole purpose of, so to speak, the self-bashing was not to feel bad, but it was to realize that you have higher aspirations. Jews have higher aspirations, and those are the true happy things. Studying Torah and doing mitzvahs are the true happiness. So now in this chapter, it's going to go into a meditation, which is not so much about what you're doing wrong, but it's about the world. And this is actually very interesting because it starts off, it says, sometimes you feel you have to be more involved in Judaism, so this is what you should do to be more involved in Judaism. So what do we say? We said you have to think deeply about and envision the following thing. And we said when the word envision comes, it means to think about it for hours or a long time. Take time to focus. Not just, when you're doing something else, and think about it, admit to it, but take time to focus. We said what you need to focus? You need to focus on God's oneness. We said we need to realize how God is in every detail of the world and gives life to every detail, and everything gets its life from God. Furthermore, God creates everything and is beyond the world. He's the creator, so he's beyond the world. And furthermore, he's totally beyond the world. And even in this world, God is present in the same way that he was before the world was created. And therefore, everything in the world is essentially nothing. Everything in the world is nothing. Everything in the world is only an emanation of God. So we said, when you think about that, how God is A, in control, B, he's creator, C, everything is him, there's nothing outside of him, there's no situation, no creation outside of him, and he's fully present in it and fully beyond it at the same time. So God is not limited. We said if we say God gives life to the world, then God can't control everything. He controls the life source. But we said no, more than that. God is imbued in everything in the world. If you think about that, and therefore God is the only thing, just like before the creation of the world, relative to God, nothing changed, because everything is him. It's just new formation of him. And we said even in this place where there's a heaven and earth, it's only him, and nothing changed. And this is what it says in the verse, I am God, I never change. So the world, relative to God, is insignificant, because really it's just himself.
But everything in the universe is God's creation, right?
It's God's creation, and really it's just him. The material is just him. Everything is, so the material is only him, and the material has no existence, no power to itself other than him. So we said that is, and therefore we said, in truth, everything is totally subdued to God. Every idea we have is totally subdued to God, right? Every creation is totally subdued to God because God created it in order it could do whatever it needs to do. So it's like, we might have certain information, but ultimately, who gave us the information? God gave us the information. And then we brought two parables for this idea to think about in detail. One of them is a little difficult to relate to. Oh, well, they're both difficult to relate to. Rabbis at that time kind of have a different perspective. Okay. Number one, we said every person has emotions. Now, in tomorrow's class about King Saul, we'll talk about how basically emotions run the world. This world we live in. But everyone has emotions. Now, we feel a certain way. And then we express how we feel. Where does the expression of how we feel come from? It comes from our emotion. But the raw feeling itself, in fact, has no letters. It itself doesn't express itself. It's a feeling. It's actually a different world from communication. So now if I'm sharing how I feel with somebody, I am sharing the feeling. But I'm not really sharing the feeling. I'm sharing the way the feeling becomes expressed. So in Hasidism it explains, it says, does the feeling have verbiage to express it? Yes. But it's totally hidden. I'm expressing something, but in my feelings there's no such thing as, there's no communication in the realm of feelings. So these, the little words here are, and same thing with ideas. When we take an idea, there's no letters and no words in the idea itself. We take an idea, which is actually beyond, and we extract it and express it. So basically what it's saying here, and this is explained in great deep detail in chapter 20 and 21, it says that, now, here it adds over there, and I'll explain. It says the world is created from God's speech, right? Where does speech come from? It comes from our emotions. Emotions don't really have, so now so in the realm of emotions, if you look at the emotions and you say that you're in that realm and you're looking at the speech is nothing compared to the actual feeling, the actual desire. So it says actually humans are different because once I say something, it's gone. I can't take it back. It left me. It belongs to the person who heard it, right? It belongs to him. It doesn't belong to me anymore. God is not like that. God's speech, when God speaks and creates the world, he still owns it. He can take it back. That's the difference between God and humans. But what we're trying to say here is the whole world, the whole creation are like letters. The letters in their origin, words are nothing in their origin compared to what you're trying to express. So it's a very deep concept.
If God took back, so there would be a difference between God taking back speech and God destroying something. over.
Correct. Destroying would be a new creation.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we have the sustaining of, God created the world through his speech, and it's in the continuously being
Correct.
spoken.
And that only God can do that. In other words, God can have a speech continuously being spoken and always connected to him.
So if at some moment God stopped
Speaking.
speaking, and the world then would disappear.
Correct.
So
So now I just want to say, so let's say in Maui, right? Maui wasn't God stopping speaking. God had to create a fire, right? So that's creation. That's not lack of creation. If God would stop speaking about something, that thing would cease to exist.
So what remained be as if it never existed? Or would it be that it did exist but is no longer there?
Whatever God wants to create.
That is a good question. That is a good question. I've actually thought about it before. I believe, okay, if God would stop creating something, it would cease to exist. So would we have memory of that thing? I don't know. I have to think about it because I thought about it before. Because also my memory is created. In other words, God can also my memory is also his sustaining utterance and also his speech. So he can also take away. So technically, God can delete something and delete it from my memory also, because my memory right now has to be created by God right now. Whatever I remember right now is created by God for me to remember right now.
So here's the hypothetical. We have 2 men on the moon, or 2 people on the moon, whatever, or even a satellite around the moon, and God stops speaking the earth, that creation. So those 2 people up there, what would their perception be at the moment that the earth ceased to exist?
So here's the tricky thing. Their perception is also created. So it will be, in other words, let's say God creates their perception that they remember there's an earth.
So God could create.
That doesn't actually mean there needs to be an earth. God could create our perception right now that there are things that didn't exist that we think we exist. In other words, perception is in the same system. Perception has the same faultiness. Perception is also really subdued to God. What I remember right now, or what I don't remember, is God giving me that memory right now and giving me that perception right now.
So the answer is we don't know, because we don't know what God would be doing.
Correct.
With the rest of the universe.
So, in other words, the answer would be however God would choose to do it. But don't take for granted that we have to remember something, because our perception... So that's the first parable we give. The parable we give is the world is God's speech. And relative to the person, the expression you have is nothing compared to the actual feeling. So God is looking at the world, it's like, oh, it's just speech. What's speech? Speech is nothing, especially if it's connected to you. So now, once I say something, now you have the right to take it, transcribe it. It belongs to you. Now, but let's say I'm thinking about something to say. That's just a better, let's say I'm thinking of something to say. So now that speech that I'm thinking is an expression of the feeling. It's nothing. It's like, it's really nothing. I can change it. It can go away. There's been like modern Hasidic guys who make a parable from watching a movie that you can turn off the screen and there's nothing there. The screen is really nothing. What you see is really nothing. So anyways, that's the first parable. Now it gives a second parable. And there's 2 parables here, and there's a reason why there are 2. But he gives another parable, a physical parable. That's a soul parable. So yes, if you study Hasidism, you study I probably studied about the soul and the mechanism of speech and this and emotions probably for 100,000 hours. I mean, you study it everywhere. However, it is difficult to understand. It is a spiritual, metaphysical concept. Now we're going to do a physical parable. The physical parable is from the sun and the sunlight. Now, when it's important to kind of divide up, just to clarify. We do not have the sun with us right now. we have the rays of the sun, right? Now, if you look at the sun, you don't actually see the sun. You see the sun's emanation. That's what you're seeing. You see the way the sun emanates into the realm of vision. Now, as you get closer to the sun, the rays are more powerful. So here's a theoretical question. If you will go in the sun itself, are there rays of light in the sun? Are there rays? Well, so on one hand, if there's rays all the way here, and we're so far away, for sure whatever's here has to be in the sun. Because how would the sun give it to us? Right? However, when you go in the sun is its own material. In other words, the rays come out. So are there rays in the sun? Yes, they have to be there because look outside the sun. But if you were in the sun, would you see rays of light? You wouldn't see it because, on the contrary, the sun's existence is so powerful that the rays that you see outside the sun, they're nothing in the sun. Okay, so this is where we have the same thing. The whole world is emanations of light from God, right? If God is everywhere, these emanations are really nothing. They're really nothing. So God is everywhere. So in other words, we are in God. We are in the source right now because God is source is everywhere. It's infinite. And therefore, everything which is in the sun, everything which is in the world is really a non-existence.
Yeah, you're right, it's confusing.
Well, so I just want to say, like, in the beginning of this, it says, Kishayamik. It says you have to think about it in depth. Number one, be it sire. So I want to say, like, these two things, these are like 6 lines in the Tanya. Mentos, please stop kicking. These lines in the Tanya, you have to really think about it a lot. It's like a really, it's not like, oh, let me explain it to you, I understand. It's like it's something you have to think about. Yeah.
So I just want to read the Steinsaltz's translation of this in Hebrew. He says, an analogy to this from the physical world, namely the concept of a nullification of the sun's radiance and light within its source. That is, the body of the sun in its firmament. In there too, the sun's radiance and light certainly shine and radiate even more than its radiance and illumination in the expanse of the universe. But there, inside the sun, and this is what you're saying, but I don't really understand it. It says, but there, inside the sun, its existence is nullified within its source as though it doesn't exist at all.
Correct.
We're in the same place, right?
Correct. We just mentally dropped something.
And then Steinsaltz's commentary is, in the light of the sun shines everywhere except within the sun itself. When the light shines outside the sun, it appears as an independent entity that gives vitality to complete worlds. But within the sun, none of that has any significance.
Correct.
When the light is in the source from which it is generated, it is nullified.
So what we're trying to say is if you would talk about sunlight, where is there more sunlight? Outside the sun or in the sun? Let's analyze that a little bit. Where is there more sunlight? Now, light is very bright, but actually the irony is there's more sunlight out of the sun than in the sun. Because in the sun, in the origin itself is so powerful and so pure that you can't define anything as sunlight inside there. When the light comes out, then you can say, hey, can you open the window? I get some light, right? So where's the sunlight most defined? Actually, in a dark room, when you open a window, now you can point and say that is sunlight, right? So what we're trying to say is if we know sunlight exists in the sun, but if you will be in the sun, if you will go into the sun, the sunlight, what we call. Now, in order to be defined as sunlight, it has to have 2 things. Number one, it has to be very bright, right? It has to be sun bright. Number 2, it has to be only light of the sun. If it's the sun itself, you don't really call it sunlight.
So, I'm sorry.
So now, let's just go into the parable here. So, basically, everything in the world is an emanation of God, like light from God, right? So everything comes from God. So now, when God is fully present, then those things, the definition of them isn't a real definition.
So when we are, say, on Earth,
Yeah.
we have a frame of reference.
Let me just finish this. So now, it says, "V'kacha mamish, derech mashal." The same thing is from the parable is the world's nullification. Bitul el muluv b'mitzias l'gavim makarish or in seif k'wen shekasar sham b'richos. The world relative to the infinite energy of God. V'hinei k'sheyayimek b'zeh harbe. When you think about this a lot, the Alter Rebbe says, Yismach libo, your heart will become very, very happy. V'sagol nafshi, your soul will become happy. Af gilas v'ran, in a very, very strong level of deep happiness. B'chol live in your whole heart. V'nefesh, your whole soul. U'ma'id b'amunazu, with this faith. Ki rabbi, ki kiras al kimamish. You realize just how close God to you. You are the ray of light in the sun. So anyways, yeah, so let's go back to the parable. So yeah, this has to be thought about a lot.
So in order for us to know that, say, sunlight actually exists, we have to have darkness. We have to have a frame of reference for the light.
Correct.
So when we say the light is nullified, if you were to go in the sun or to be close to God, there's no frame of reference for it. And therefore, we don't perceive it to be
I think-
something distinct because it's all around us. There's no frame of reference for it.
Correct.
Is that
Correct.
okay?
So now if we think about the world, because the world is emanation of God, just because we are created in a realm where there's a frame of reference of distinguished creations and different modes, the reality is there is no frame of reference. It is just God's manifestation because it's all created from God himself.
So it means
So in other words,
that's why we have to have an imperfect world.
well, so
Because-
in other words, God did not create. Really, the reality is Judaism believes, even with the Tzimtzum and everything like that, God did not create a world in a godless reality. He created a world, and this is a very complex subject, but he created a world in himself. Because there is nothing outside of him. So if there's nothing outside, and this is what we say in the Shema, and Edom Bovado, and all these verses in the Torah, there is no reality outside of him. So what is everything really? It's just God. Right? So that's where we're getting here. Everything is God, and there is really, in reality, there's not a frame of reference of creations other than God. So what is real in the world? What's real is a mitzvah is real, because that's God, and God is saying do a mitzvah. So Hasidim would always say that the world is fake. They call the world, this is the fake world.
Simulation.
It's a simulation. It's fake. Alma de Shikra. On the other hand, it's real. The Torah says it's real. Bereshit bara Elokim. God created a world. What's real in the world? Whatever God says is real is real. Whatever God doesn't say is real is a simulation.
But we don't have a consciousness separate from God. So we can't know. I mean, if you use the simulation analogy, then you don't have a consciousness separate from it, so you can't know that it is a simulation, right? I mean,
Well, so
we
correct.
exist in God's.
Correct.
So if you anthropomorphize it, you would say we exist, and everything around us exists in God's imagination, in God's mind.
Yeah.
If you
Correct. So you think about it a lot. But yes, correct. In other words,